It was June 22, 1876. The Dakota sky was a vault of pale fire when Custer and his men pulled out from the mouth of the Rosebud, riding hard and looking for trouble, specifically, for signs of Indian movement. The summer sun gave little quarter. Days were long, nights short, and the tension on edge. 2 days later, on June 24, the column moved again, pushing forward through the heat and grit. By nightfall, the horses were blowing hard and the men barely had time to eat or loosen their belts before they were ordered to ride again, this time through the dark. We kept on till the small hours, finally halting around 4 a.m., but no one dared fully rest. The horses stayed saddled. The soldiers dropped where they stood, boots still on, heads on saddlebags, dozing on the bare ground. That's when 2 Arikara scouts showed up, dust-caked and dead serious. They'd been sent by Lieutenant Varnum, who'd gone ahead to scout the country for hostile encampments. Their message was clear. A big Indian village was spotted down in the little Bighorn Valley, and worse, the enemy already knew we were coming. Custer didn't waste time. He took me and the 2 Arikara messengers, along with a couple of our own scouts, and we rode out to meet Varnum. We reached his position just as the sun cracked the horizon. From that ridge, you could see what looked like a massive shadow moving across the valley floor, rows and rows of teepees, riders, dust clouds rising like smoke signals to the heavens. It wasn't the main village. We found out later the bigger camp was farther downstream, but it was large enough to put any doubts to rest. At first, we thought they were fleeing. That illusion wouldn't last long. Custer seemed irritated as we turned back. He spurred hard, riding fast to rejoin the main column. About halfway there, his brother Tom Custer came up with the advance line of the troops. George reined in and snapped, "Tom, who the hell gave the order to push forward?" I said stay put. We were supposed to wait and strike after dark. Now they know we're coming. Once we were all back with the main force, the officers held a quick council. Time was short. The original plan was out the window, and Custer had a new one. He split the regiment into 3 parts, 3 separate spear points for a rapid assault. Benteen would veer off to the left, sweeping the ridges for any scattered groups. Reno was told to move down the valley and make first contact. Custer said he'd come in behind him and offer support. "Take the scouts," he added. Reno took off at a gallop. At this point, we still believed the hostiles were in retreat. But when we hit the river crossing, that assumption blew apart. From my vantage, I could see the warriors weren't running, they were regrouping. They were circling back, preparing to fight. I rode straight to Reno and told him what I saw. He paused briefly, then gave the signal to advance. But I knew Custer needed to hear this. It changed everything. I spun my mount and rode hard back toward his position. Not far along the trail, I ran into Lieutenant Cook, Custer's adjutant. He flagged me down. "Gerard, what's happening?" I told him what I'd seen. Without hesitation, Cook sent me back to Reno and turned his own horse toward Custer, likely to warn him of the danger. By the time I returned, Reno had dismounted his men and spread them thin along a ridge just above the timber belt. It was rough cover, but decent enough. The men were spread out, maybe 6 feet between each, and they opened fire as the first warriors charged. Most used the trees and brush for cover, but the Indians didn't charge straight through. They flanked us, riding around to take the higher ground behind and to our left. That's when we spotted Custer's column moving across the distant bluffs, too far to be of help. Not long after, Reno shouted the order, "They're getting around us, mount and charge." It was about 1:30 in the afternoon. Honestly, it took me by surprise. We had good ground. We could have held longer. But Reno had made his decision. As the troops pulled back through the woods, it quickly turned from a charge into a rout. The warriors were close enough to pick them off one by one. I saw Charlie Reynolds go down on the slope to the left, and Isaiah Dorman, farther out, was shot from his saddle. The line broke apart as the men fell back toward the river. They tried to cross where they'd seen Custer pass earlier. It was chaos, men were shot in the back as they ran. When the survivors finally scrambled up the far bluff, they were met by Benteen and his force. But the panic from Reno's retreat had spread. Whatever discipline remained was fading fast. No effort was made to push on to support Custer. It was around 2 o'clock by then, and for over an hour, no fresh Indian attacks came. But neither did help ride out to the sound of gunfire in the distance. Later, I found myself back down in the timber. There, I came across a few others who'd been cut off, Lieutenant DeRudio, Sergeant O'Neill, and William Jackson, a half-breed Blackfoot scout. We hunkered down and listened. All afternoon, the air carried the sound of gunfire, sporadic at first, then a steady thunder. The deep cracks of volley fire slowly faded, replaced by the sharp, scattered reports of Indian rifles. The realization set in, Custer's men were being overrun. We lay low until dusk, then made an attempt to move out. At first, we aimed west, thinking maybe Reno's force had pulled back across the river. We tried one ford, but the bodies, dozens of them, blocked the way. The stench, the floating corpses, the blood in the water, it was enough to spook our horses and turn our stomachs. We found another way across, and just as we reached the opposite bank, we saw a brief flicker of light, a match struck in the dark. We called out, "Troops! Hello there!" But the flame disappeared. A moment later, silhouettes came into view, warriors, not soldiers. They heard us. One shouted, "Are you afraid? We are not white troops." O'Neill and DeRudio hit the ground, hiding in the brush. Jackson and I bolted, riding straight into a cutbank. Both our mounts threw us, weapons lost in the chaos. But somehow we found a crossing. We climbed the far side of the stream just as the eastern sky began to glow. We could hear more Indians crossing behind us, heading down toward where Reno had regrouped. We didn't stop. We ran our horses hard until we hit a patch of willows and ducked inside, out of sight. There we stayed until nightfall. Around 11 a.m. the next morning, we saw the warriors launch another attack on Reno's new position. But something changed late in the day. Right before sunset, we heard shouting, panic, confusion. It was clear the Indians had spotted General Terry's column in the distance. Suddenly, the momentum shifted. The warriors began to pull back, some galloped off to gather their families, others rode upstream, retreating from the battlefield in long, fast columns. We lay still in those willows, watching from our hiding spot, as hundreds of them passed, dust trailing like shadows on the move. Fred Gerard's memory cuts through the fog of myth. He saw, plainly, that the Indians were not running from Reno, they were turning to fight. He passed this urgent information up the chain. That Custer received it is not in doubt. Even Harry Moccasin, a Crow scout, told Custer that Reno's men were fighting hard. Custer knew what was unfolding and knew Reno was badly outnumbered, by Gerard's own estimate, maybe 10-1. And yet, Custer's promised support never came. The only explanation that makes any tactical sense is that Custer was struck down early. Perhaps during his failed attempt to cross the river at Medicine Tail Coulee, as claimed by eyewitnesses like White Cow Bull and Pretty Shield. Without Custer to lead them, the remaining officers may have faltered, lacking clear direction in the face of overwhelming force. That possibility doesn't excuse the disaster. But it does explain why, after that initial drive, Custer's battalion slowed, scattered, and finally collapsed. Fred Gerard, sometimes called Frank or F.F. Gerard, may have carried many names. But the man himself stood firm in the middle of history's storm. He didn't flinch, and he didn't forget.